We are now live.
Thank you. At 5:01, I will call to order the Finance Committee for today, Monday, July 29th. And, July, did I say July? Okay, I think it's July. Counselor Cassett thinks it's June, but it's actually January. January 29th. We could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
Here.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Garcia,
Here.
Counselor Faulkner,
Here.
Chair Romero Worth.
I am present.
Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have changes tonight to our agenda?
Madam Chair, no changes from staff.
All right, can I get a roll call? I will get this together. Can I get a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Madam Chair, so I think I had Counselor Cassett with the motion and Counselor Faulkner with the second.
That's fine. We'll let Counselor Lee Garcia second the next one. All those in favor, aye? Anybody opposed? That motion passes. The next is the consent agenda. We do have a couple of items the committee would like to hear. I believe it's C and H. Am I correct?
Madam Chair, that's correct. Item C and item H.
All right. Anything else the committee is interested in tonight? Can I get a motion?
Move to approve as amended.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion also passes. We are now on to presentations. And Director Oster, I believe you have a couple of presentations tonight. We'll start with 5A, the finance staff recognition and introductions.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. We have a few of our team members from finance here with us this evening. If I could ask Andy Hopkins to come up to the podium first. Andy is being recognized tonight as part of our new staff recognition series. You may remember back in December, we recognized Leona Shaw. Tonight, we're recognizing Andy Hopkins. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Andy, and then I'll turn it over to him as well if he wants to share anything else. Andy has worked at the City of Santa Fe for 22 years, beginning as a budget analyst, senior budget analyst, and is currently the head of the budget division as the budget officer. Andy was born in Hutchinson, Kansas, and moved to Santa Fe from Wichita, Kansas on September 11th of 2001. So memorable day. He received his bachelor's degree from the University of Notre Dame and a master's in public administration from Wichita State University. Andy enjoys the outdoors, which is the reason he wanted to live in New Mexico. And we are very fortunate to have Andy as our budget officer here at the city, especially right now as we're heading into the budget preparation season for the new fiscal year. So with that, I would like to present Andy with a certificate of appreciation from the city to thank you for your service. And then I'll turn it over to you for anything that you'd like to add.
I'll keep it very brief. Just appreciate the recognition. Nice to be recognized, and many of you I've worked with for quite a few years in the past. Pretty much everybody on this group except for Counselor Faulkner, and I look forward to working with you as well. And that's about it. Appreciate the certificate and the recognition.
Well, we very much appreciate you and all the work you do this time of year and honestly year round around budget issues and putting it together and helping us understand it and ask questions and have the knowledge necessary to be able to answer all those questions that we ask. So really appreciate the hard work you put in, and I think it's well-deserved recognition. And I don't know if Counselor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Andy, thank you. I was as lost as last year's Easter eggs when I got put on finance in 2014. And I spent a fair amount of time bugging you in your office, those first few years. And, you always, you're a good teacher and you're patient and you're always very, very kind. I just, I'm deeply appreciative to you for not only all that you do, but how generous the spirit you are with your information and continuously kind all the time. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you both for those kinds of words, and I'll just close by saying, you know, our door is always open if you all ever have questions. You know, if you ever want to, you know, get a read on certain aspects of the budget process or the whole budget process or anything else, you know, my door is always open, and you know, if I'm not around, somebody will call me and get me there toot sweet. So, you know, I'm always look forward to speaking with any of you if you ever have any questions or, you know, anything I can address, you know, that's what I'm here for.
Thank you. That's awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy, so much for.
Oh, we got one more. Counselor Cassett, sorry.
No, I did want to thank you, but I also know that you guys have a new finance newsletters. Do you want to maybe grab a picture of yourself with your, or no?
I believe my picture is already in there.
Okay.
So,
Madam Chair and Councillor Cassett, we do have a picture of Andy in the newsletter. We can snap another one. Armenia, would you do the honors? Armenia is our administrator for the finance department, our admin manager, and also the mastermind behind the newsletter. Madam Chair, do you want to join us for the picture? Or do we want to have the whole committee?
You can do the whole committee.
Okay. Great.
Okay, that's always fun. I think you have some introductions as well.
Yes,
We
Madam
have
Chair.
new
Thank
members
you.
of the team.
We do. Yes, we have Matthew Bonifer. Matt, would you mind coming up to the podium? I think most of you have heard me talk about Matt, and I'm so happy to have him here in person to introduce you. At our last meeting on January 8th, that was Matt's first day, and as you recall, the weather was terrible on that day, so we were all remote. So Matt Bonifer has joined us again on January 8th as our accounting officer, so he's about a little over 3 weeks in. Matt, do you want to tell the committee a little bit about yourself and your background?
Did everyone hear me? Okay, yeah. Pleasure to meet you all who I haven't met and those who I have so far. Background is I am a local Santa Fean. I grew up here, went to school, Santa Fe High, went down to UNM and got my bachelor's in finance and master's in accountancy there. Worked in public accounting for about a decade, spent a little bit of time most recently in the Bay Area, working for some nonprofits. And now with my family relocated back here to kind of remake Santa Fe our forever home. And so wanted to be part of something that would contribute to that and working for the city. So here I am working, like you said, week number 4.
We are very happy to have Matt on board. He's jumped in with both feet and really helping with the audits, getting to know the team in the finance department and getting up to speed on everything that we have going on. So it's a great addition to the team.
Great, welcome. Well, I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, Matt. We really appreciate it.
Okay, I think we can move on to 5B, which is our audit report. And I believe our audit representatives are here on Zoom with Carr Riggs Ingram to present the FY22 audit, which maybe you want to do a little preface on this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, that would be great. We have AJ Bowers, the partner from Carr Riggs Ingram on Zoom. And Philip, could you turn the TVs on for us, please? We're not seeing AJ on this side of the room.
I am on, so thank you very
Oh.
much.
Great, there we go. Thank you, AJ. And we're starting to see you now. We just have the one big screen that doesn't seem to be on. Great, perfect. Okay, thank you. So I'll just give a little intro and then I'll turn it over to AJ to take us through the report. So the City of Santa Fe's fiscal year 2022 audit is now available. It was released to the public on January 18th. The FY22 audit covers the time period beginning July 1st of 2021 and ending June 30th of 2022. And this is the second annual audit that the city has completed in the last 6 months with the help of Carr Riggs Ingram and our consultants at Clifton Larson Allen. So just as a reminder, the FY21 audit was released on July 31st, and then the FY22 audit was released on January 18th. So we're very proud of that. We are working on FY23, which I'll talk about in our next presentation. And I think with that, I'll turn it over to AJ to take us through the report.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Emily, for the introduction. And members of the committee, thank you for having me tonight. I trust that you're able to see the screen. Is that accurate?
Yes, we are.
Excellent. You should have a copy of the presentation as well, but I just wanted to make sure that you were able to see it, and that my work was that I was functioning on Zoom appropriately. So
And I'd just add, this is available on the city's website, correct? For the public if they wanted to see it.
Madam Chair, AJ sent it to me, but I don't think I got it on PrimeGov. I can put it on PrimeGov. The audit report itself is on PrimeGov, but let me work on that right now while AJ's taking you through the slides.
Okay, thank you.
not a problem. So what we'll cover today, obviously we'll kind of go over our presentation itself as it relates to a few items related to the 2022 audit. And if there's questions, whatever you've got, you can go ahead and just ask as we walk through the presentation. If you don't, that's fine as well. Whatever you want to look at. So as Emily talked about, it's a 2022 audit. So we're going to kind of talk about the timeline, what that looks like, where we've been as it relates to the fiscal year 22 audit, the scope of work, what we're looking at, the reports themselves and the findings that are in there. And then if you have any questions, obviously, feel free to ask as we go through it. But from a timeline perspective, as Emily said, the 21 audit was released in July. It was submitted in June of 2023. Prior to that release, we had already started some of the work as it relates to the 2022 audit. With our planning work, rolled forward as much as we could, utilize some of the control items from the prior year, et cetera, and started to do some of that testing really in that June through August timeframe of 2023. Real heavy in what we would call our field work to substantiate the balances and the transactions in August through December of 23. We had the exit conference December 4th of 2023. The independent auditor's report is dated December 7th, and that is the date that it went to the state auditor's office, was December 7th of 2023. And then the release from the state auditor's office was 11 days ago, January 18th of 24. So that's kind of the time frame, shortened time frame. It's a little bit shifted for that 2022 audit, but obviously we've worked on 21, here's 22, and we're working on 23, which Emily will talk about. But that's kind of the timeline itself. So here we are having this finance presentation or the committee to the finance committee after the release of the audit. The scope of the work, right? So the June 30, 2022 audit, that's what we're talking about here. So we conducted an audit in accordance with all applicable standards. in accordance with the New Mexico State Audit Rule, government auditing standards, uniform guidance, everything that we have to follow from a professional standards perspective in order to obtain an opinion for the June 30, 2022, and render that opinion at the end of the year. So we've done that audit. We prepared the financial statements with the help of the consultant as well as the help of the city in order to put it into that nice document for you. And then there's the different reports that are in there, which we'll get to in a moment. As part of that testing, we also were engaged to render an opinion and test the major federal programs. And so we did single audit compliance testing for each of those major federal programs. We tested the Homeland Security Grant and the Airport Improvement Program. So those two programs, we do a bunch of work as it relates to the controls and the compliance with those programs, and then you'll have a separate report related to that. So we test the single audit as well. The other portion of the audit is we have to test for compliance with the New Mexico State Audit Rule. So it doesn't mean that we render an opinion on compliance with the New Mexico State Audit Rule, but there are items that are part of the testing requirements that we have to look at. And anything that we find is reported to you in that report, but we do have to test things like procurement and travel and budgetary items, et cetera, in accordance with the state audit rule. And we've done that compliance as well. Again, not necessarily an opinion on compliance, but anything that we find, we do report. So as we talk about those reports themselves, there are 3 reports in the financial statements. So the financial statements, as I said, we do prepare as a service to you, but those are your financials. They're from your numbers, your information, just put into that nice format. There's 3 reports. Those are ours. Those are the 3 things that you've really hired us to do in order to render those reports and to say what they are. So in that first report, which is around pages 10 to 13. That's the independent auditor's report. So that is where the opinion on the financial statements lies. That is an unmodified opinion. So that's the best opinion that's available. It means that the city has complied in all material respects with the accounting requirements in the state of under GAAP, right? So anything as it relates to GASB pronouncements, those are, and that's what GAAP is for governments, is that what the numbers are presented makes sure that all of those items are in the right spots, et cetera, that we've tested those items and they comply with GAAP. The other is that we've been able to render an opinion on all areas. What that means is that there's no area where we couldn't obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So when we look at things like cash, that's what we call a hard number. Where there's a bank statement, we can confirm it with the bank. It's a tangible item. We know that it exists. We know that it's there, and we can confirm that. So we obtain that kind of support for something like that. Then when there are other items such as depreciation expense, that's an estimate. So we have to consider the policies, the procedures, the industry standards, the processes that are in place as it relates to the city in order to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence around those estimates. So whether it's a soft number in an estimate or a hard number like cash or whatever, we've been able to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, and the city has complied with that. So that's kind of the first real big spot. So that's a really big deal. That's the same opinion that was on the financial statements in 2021. So that unmodified opinion, it means we're able to obtain that evidence. So good job. That's what we're here for. It's what the public and the city is always shooting for. As it relates to the next report in the financial statement, so this is around pages 200 and 201. Every audit that's conducted under the New Mexico State Audit Rule is conducted under government auditing standards. Okay, so what these standards require is that we report on things that we find for you, and we report them to you. It is a negative assurance report. So what negative assurance means is we do not render an opinion on internal controls. We might test internal controls for reliance to reduce our testing, but we do understand controls as it relates to determine what further audit procedures we're going to do. But we don't render an opinion on your internal controls. So negative assurance states these are items that we found and are reporting to you. Others may exist that we did not identify. Under government auditing standards, there are 3 levels of findings that we have to report. That is material weakness, significant deficiency, and material noncompliance. So under the government auditing standards report, what that would mean is a material weakness is that's the highest level. That's a big deal. If something goes wrong here, it could materially affect the financial statements. It could materially affect the user's opinion on those financial statements. Okay, so that's kind of the highest level. The next level down is a significant deficiency. The definition of that is doesn't rise to the level of material, yet still merits the attention of the governing body. So it might involve resources, it might involve some sort of resolution or budgetary things that say, hey, the board needs to be involved in order to assist in getting this, we need to report it to you so that way you can help with the correction of them. But it's not a material item. And then the next one would be a material noncompliance. And that means that you don't comply with a grant or a debt covenant or something in a material way that could affect the city. So as it relates to those types of findings, there are 5 of those types of findings. And by those, I mean material weakness, significant deficiencies, and material noncompliance under government auditing standards. So there were 4 material weaknesses and 1 significant deficiency. In addition to those in the report, in the state of New Mexico, we have to report other matters or other noncompliance to you. So as I mentioned, in compliance with the New Mexico state audit rule, we have 9 of those types of findings in there. And what that is an other matter is more, it's not necessarily a compliance-based item, but it's a control aspect that doesn't rise to the level of significant. So if you have something that we find, we report it to you in one of those 2 buckets. And then the other noncompliance would be, doesn't rise to the level of material noncompliance, but is a noncompliance factor. So for example, if you overexpended to travel, then you've overexpended travel. It's a compliance issue, but it's not material. Okay. So overall, there's 14 findings that are reported in there as it relates to the government auditing standards report, not talking about the federal awards. The findings encompassed in the schedule of findings and question costs are pages 212 through 242 of the financial statement. The last report, and we'll go over the finding titles here in a moment, and if you've got questions, you can let me know. The last report in the financial statement is on pages 202 through 205. And this is the independent auditor's report on compliance for the major federal programs. So as I mentioned, we tested 2 federal programs, the Airport Improvement Program and the Homeland Security Grant. The Airport Improvement Program was an unmodified opinion. And so I want to point out that's a big deal because there was a qualified opinion in 2021. So this is a change. It's an improvement from 21 to 22. Okay. So there were 2 material weaknesses over internal controls over compliance, and one of those is considered an other non-compliance. Now what that means is, just like within those government auditing standards findings, those are financial statement controls and compliance are related to those items. We evaluate all of the compliance requirements and the controls around the city's and the city's controls around compliance as we conduct our audits for both of those programs. So we did note there were 2 control issues that could lead to a non-compliance issue that's material in those programs. Okay, so that's a weakness that could lead to that. That's the highest level of finding there. Okay, so when we also did note there is 1 other non-compliance. So in the Airport Improvement Program, what that means is it's not material non-compliance. That material non-compliance is what affects the opinions on those programs. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a moment. The Homeland Security Grant, there was an unmodified opinion as well. So that means you've complied with all material respects with the types of compliance requirements that are direct material to that grant. And that was not audited in 2021. So this was a new program that was tested. And there was 1 significant deficiency as it relates to controls over compliance. So kind of a real quick recap. And then those findings specifically as it relates to the federal programs are on 222 to 227. So as I recap, unmodified opinion on the financial statements, unmodified opinion on the major federal programs, and then there's a total of, I believe, 17 findings, and we'll kind of go over those here in just a moment. From a findings perspective, Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of let you know where things are, kind of the breakdown of how findings are titled, because I think you can learn from those. And then where they are. In the findings that were talked about in detail at the exit conference. You've got the full detail, what happened, our recommendations, the city's responses, okay, all of those items there. And so those are all in the financial statements themselves. So when we look at the findings, we're going to go in order, but FS means financial statement. That's one of those findings that goes into that government auditing standards report. It's a control item. The number there, 2022-001, that's the first finding in the report. The pieces in the parentheses, that's historical numbering. Okay, so that means 2019 number 7. So this finding originated in 2019. Then you have the title of the finding, and then in the brackets at the end, or the parentheses at the end, we just wanted to call out what the level is. So MW stands for material weakness. SD would be significant deficiency. So the first one here, these first 3 on this slide are all repeat findings from 2019, 2017, 2020 respectively, and they're all material weaknesses. So the first one is the scheduled expenditures, federal awards, and internal controls over the grant reporting, and that was a material weakness. The details are on 213 and 214. Finding 2 is internal controls over the financial close and reporting, and this is also a material weakness that's a repeat from 2017. Pages 215 through 216. That's where all the details are on that one. Finding 3 is a repeat from 2020, and that is controls over journal entries, also a material weakness on pages 217 and 218. This next one here is the last material weakness as it relates to the financial statements, and it's a repeat from 2020. Okay, and it's controls over cash, and that's on 219 and 220. So you'll have the details of those all in those pages. The next finding was controls over payroll, and that was a significant deficiency on page 221. That was a new finding in 2022. Okay, so as you can see, it doesn't have those parentheses, so it's a new finding in the current year. Then we jump into the federal findings, and there's 3 of these. And that's exactly what it states. It tells you again, the finding number, the repeat piece, the title, and then if it's material weakness, etc. And we wanted to note what they're for because we have to describe what major program a federal finding is there for. And so for this first one, it's a matching in financial reporting. It's a material weakness. It's on pages 222 and 223, and it relates to the airport improvement program. So as I mentioned, there was still a couple material weaknesses on that program, but it did not lead to material noncompliance. And then the second finding for the airport improvement program was an activities allowed or allowable cost over non-payroll expenses. And so it was a material weakness and an other noncompliance. And that was for the airport improvement program, 224 to 225. And what I mean by other noncompliance is there was some noncompliance noted, but not material to the grant, but it was required to be reported in accordance with uniform guidance. So had it been a larger amount, that would affect opinions. Being that it was a small amount, then it's reported, but not material and affecting the opinion. And the next finding in the federal finding was a reporting finding that was considered a significant deficiency for the Homeland Security grant. So those are all the ones that would be reported on the uniform guidance. And then the next few we'll go over here are the state audit findings, right? The ones that we have to report because of the state audit rule and the way that we report things in accordance with that. So this is a repeat from 2020, and it's a controls over accounts payable, and it's considered an other matter. Okay, doesn't rise to level significant, but we're letting you know. So that's on page 228. On page 229, you have a repeat finding from 2021, and this is for pledged collateral, and this is an other non-compliance. That's on page 229. On page 230, you have a repeat finding for the emergency procurement, and that was considered an other matter finding, and that was repeated from 21. On pages 231 and 232, you have a repeat finding for budgetary compliance. And that was a repeat from 2020. And that's an other non-compliance item. On the next slide here, you have a repeat finding from 2021, and this relates to the cash appropriations and excess of available cash balances. So this is another budgetary type finding, and this is an other non-compliance. Pages 233 and 234. There's a new finding as it relates to an other matter for capital assets on page 235. There's a new finding for bank account authorized signatures, which is an other matter on page 236. And then on the last page here, you have two repeat findings, one from 2021 that relates to a wage rate clause in construction contracts. And this is an other non-compliance on 237 and 238. And then lastly, the late audit finding, other non-compliance repeat from 2019 in accordance with the state audit rule. If it's not in on time, there's a repeat finding. So that's on page 239 and 240. And before we go to the question side, I did want to note from 21 to 22, there were these items here, which were all corrected. So we had the management consultants was resolved, CDBG reporting was resolved, CDBG program income was resolved, equipment and real property management was resolved, suspension and debarment for the federal transit cluster was resolved. Some allowable activities for the federal transit cluster was resolved. Cash management for the federal transit cluster was resolved. Allowable costs as related to COVID-19 was resolved. Controls over payment vouchers was resolved. And CDBG activities for non-payroll was resolved. So you corrected 10 findings for the 22 year as well. So we had some repeats. We talked about those. We had some new ones. But I did want to mention of those findings because we have to follow up on all findings every year, just like so these 17 that we just had, we'll follow up on those in the 23 year. But I did want to mention that you had those 10 that were resolved as well. So that's pretty much all I've got. I will take questions if there are any.
Questions from the committee? Counselor Lee Garcia. And maybe, do you want to stop sharing screen? I don't know that we're going to, if we need to go back, we'll go back, but we could see you better without it. Thank
I
you.
don't disagree with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the presentation. You mentioned something during the presentation in regards to action that the governing body would be taking in regards to some of the findings. Give me some examples of what, because obviously our role here as governing body members is not directly in the management of correcting organizational issues that may can arise or be part of the problem. But can you give us some examples of what we would be looking at from a policy perspective and how to make some of these findings, how to correct some of these findings and help along from our perspective?
Absolutely. So the way that means is that when we have to report things to the board, it's because it's material, which means it's super significant, or I say super significant because it's higher than significant, right? It's something that if something goes wrong here, hey, we need to have some sort of corrective action in order to make sure that there's not an issue in the future. Same thing with significant deficiency. And what I try to make that distinction of saying that the board or the council or the committee involvement is, it's a matter of elevating it to where it's to your knowledge. And everything sits in the knowledge in the state of New Mexico. But I kind of draw that distinction in the audit standards because in other states, they only report material and significant deficiencies. They don't report all these other ones in the report themselves. And the reason for that is, someone just makes an oops on a PO, the board, okay, you know about it, but you don't have to invest resources, time, or anything else to it. But in the matter of, say, I've got a little knowledge with the city, obviously, but for example, that first finding that's in there as it relates to the internal controls around the CFA. Okay. You're aware of it. And as part of what you have done and what management has done and what you've allowed management to do is in order to go through and update, you've got the Munis upgrade. There's different pieces going on with training through Munis that are able to now segregate, or that are working towards getting towards a grant segregation within the system itself. The city's not going to undertake some sort of process like that without the board's involvement or the council's involvement. And so sometimes if it's a lack of internal controls because you don't have the staffing, the city can't go hire folks without the budgetary capacity that comes from the city council as well. And so that's what we mean by elevating it to those points, because sometimes those recommendations are there, or what the city is asking for in their responses, which might be the case, might not be, if they might need the resources, the training, the technology, whatever it might be, in order to correct and mitigate those types of findings. So does that help clarify that that's the distinction that we kind of look at it from?
It doesn't in one sense, but it almost just seems as if we are basically given a report, obviously to satisfy the needs of the audit, that tells us, okay, we're deficient in certain areas. Take one of the findings with the schedule of expenditures. How could we as a committee or a governing body altogether collaboratively help to remedy the issue that we're having there, so it's not repeat, which I believe it's been repeated already. And so again, an example of what we can do as governing body members to remedy this issue.
So I know in that particular finding, as an example, the city has hired a grants manager. You've worked towards, you're doing the Munis upgrade. There was a major impact on that upgrade itself, the new Munis implementation, because it was no longer supporting the 19 version. And so really it's just a matter, I mean, in that area, it's ensuring that the city, and with your help, because you're the city, everyone there has the resources and the items that are needed. Doesn't mean that you're not looking. It doesn't mean that you're not trying to do those things. It's just really elevating it to that point, because this is kind of a material area. So it's not necessarily putting it on the board saying, hey, board, this isn't going on and it's your fault. That's not what it is at all. It's a matter of just informing you to say, this is a material item, and you have to prioritize whichever findings you think are there. I know a lot of people look at volume of findings, right? Number. I look at severity, because the other matters and other non-compliance, people are going to make mistakes. People are going to make an oops, something's going to happen. We're held to 100% A+ threshold. We look at things that are material, saying, okay, we've had a repeat finding in, say, this area for this long. What do we need to do to fix it? What might be the area that we need to consider, and what might be that correction? The people that are closest to it as it relates to that are going to be the best people to know exactly what needs to be there, because we can't make the management decisions. We're just looking at it to say, these are some recommendations we have, but you're the one that, and by you, I mean, the management of the city is the one that's working with it every single day, working with the software company or something that might be able to help out. But I do know, if you look at the response to that, there's been a lot of action from that finding specifically, that the city and the council has put in action. And sometimes it's not going to be a right away fix, but hiring people, getting the upgrades done, the Munis upgrade, the training that y'all are investing in, that's all relevant to getting you out of that situation, which unfortunately it takes a little bit of time, because I think the city's looking for full implementation for the fiscal year 25, which would really become, July of 24 forward is what the city's goal is. So it is a repeat, but if you look, there's also been, say, what is progress, right? So there has been progress, because we talk about that progress as part of the finding as well.
Thank you for your response. And again, I take it as being more informational. And I gather from your response to that question, it seems as if it's very much more operational and management. I do think that us being involved with with the administration of the city, helped in furthering and remedying some of these issues. So, you know, I think for right now, I will go ahead and yield the floor, but I do appreciate the responses to my questions. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Counselor. Mr. Bowers, I think it might be helpful, and I don't know if Director Oster wants to weigh in here. Starting on page 213, I believe, of the audit, I think there's some narrative there that might be helpful in providing some more response to Counselor Garcia's questions. It talks, each finding is described. It talks about management's progress, talks about, you know, why this finding was occurred, what the effect is, what you all are recommending to remedy it. In some cases, I think there's even an estimated timeline for completion. There's also a call out in some of these of who the responsible officials are to remedy some of these findings. And I guess it would be helpful maybe if you, Mr. Bowers, and maybe Director Oster, if you want to say anything more about those. They go from page 213 all the way to the end, I believe, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So with that, and I had alluded to that, but I think that would maybe be very helpful commentary. And so the way the findings are laid out is required by both government auditing standards and then some additional information that the state of New Mexico requires through the state audit rule. So at the beginning of them, federal findings have a couple extra pieces in them, and I'll cover those in a minute, but all of those findings will have a condition. That's the first part. That's the what happened. That's it, right? So what did we find? The next part, if it's a repeat finding, we'll have management's progress on repeat findings. And so since we've audited last year, we audit what's happened, and then we say these are the changes from last year's finding, and these are where the progress is, whether it says that this is the progress that's been made or no progress has been made. That's absolutely possible. So it'll say what that management progress is. The criteria is like, what's the violation? What's the accounting practice? What's the statute? What's the guidance, whatever it is that, you know, is in, say, violation. All right. Then there's the cause, and that's exactly what it means is what caused this to be the case. Okay. So why did such a thing happen? What, you know, that it directly relates to the condition. This is what happened, and this is the why, the cause. The effect is, if this is going on, what can happen? What's the risk? What is the problem? Where are we deficient? That's the effect. Then we have the auditor's recommendation, and that's what we write to say, these are things that we recommend, or a generalized statement of you should ensure grant funding or whatever it is, right? So we'll have our recommendation. And then after that, you have the views of responsible officials and planned corrective action. So that's really that corrective action plan that management has put out to say, this is what, you know, we agree with the finding. These are the things that we're doing. And there's, you know, the information that Emily and her team wrote in order to be able to respond to how they're going to correct those or what they think about the finding. And then two more parts that were added by the state of New Mexico is one is the responsible official. So who is responsible for that finding? And then an estimated timeline of when it's going to be corrected. Okay, so that's the layout within those findings. There are two other things that I just want to mention in a federal finding. The first part is, what is the federal program? What's the grant number, et cetera? So there's an identification of which program was there. And then there will be another spot that talks about a questioned cost, okay? Or known or likely questioned cost. So when I talked about that airport improvement one, there was a questioned cost that wasn't deemed material, but it was reportable saying that there was this piece in it. But all the other parts are identical, okay? So that's the commentary there. Emily, did you want to add anything to that?
No, thank you. I think you really covered it well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I do have a couple other questions, but I'll go to committee members. I just wanted to, it seemed relevant to do that piece
I
right,
appreciate that.
right then. So, Counselor Cassett, then Counselor Lindell, if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for being here again and for your presentation and for your work. I just have a few questions, and I think actually it's more to do some more context setting around timeline, because as I'm reading things, recalling that this is the 22 audit. So we are talking July 1 of 2021 to June 30th, 2022. And in some of these, I see that the corrective action took place in September of 2022, in which case, because we're behind, it's something that we may see a little bit later. I'm trying to recall, when did we do the Munis upgrade? Do you remember what the timeline was for that?
Certainly, Madam Chair and Councillor Cassett, that was during FY '23.
Okay.
It was January of last year, end of January of 2023, which is about halfway through FY '23.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And remind me again when you came on?
Madam Chair and councillors, I started with the city in September of 2022, which was at the beginning of FY '23.
Okay. All right, that's helpful. I really think that's all my questions. I think it's just very important for us to remember and to kind of place ourselves in the correct time frame, because we have seen a lot happen over the last couple of years to correct some of these. And just I wanted to remind both the governing body and as well as any members of the public that and it actually is really helpful to see that, in the responses, you can see that there actually was a lot of action that was taken after this fiscal year, which is why, we're all very excited for 23 to see where that can take us. So I don't think I have any additional questions at this time. I know that we'll have more conversation at governing body this week. Thank you.
So I'm sorry, just to add on to that, Director Oster, we will see improvements to some of these findings. You think possibly in FY '23 when that audit comes forward?
Madam Chair and councillors, I will defer to the auditors, to say exactly what's going to happen, but I do expect to see improvement in some of these areas. The team has worked very hard during FY '23 to address a number of these issues. So I'm optimistic that that will show up in the audit results for FY '23.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't ask our auditor because I thought it was an unfair question to put him on the spot on, since we haven't submitted that audit yet. So I just wanted kind of an opinion from you being in the trenches. But of course, Mr. Bowers, if you wanted to add on, I don't mean to block you out. I just didn't think it was an appropriate question for you.
I appreciate that. Ultimately, we're starting field work. We're working on 23 and we'll report what we can when we can. Obviously, everything that goes on with the 23 audit is confidential during that time frame right now. So I'll of course defer to the end, but anything that comes up, we'll let you know.
Great. That's what I thought. Councillor
ma'am.
Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Oster, on the findings toward the end of the document, for example, I'm looking at page 216. Internal controls over financial close and reporting, a material weakness. At the bottom, it talks about responsible official, and then it says timeline and estimated completion date, December 31st, 2023, which that's a good number. We like that number. What I'm wondering is we have 14 findings, and each one of them has a timeline and an estimated completion date. Do you think that you could just put together a very brief memo for us with what the finding is, what class it falls under, be it material weakness or significant deficiency. And then just give us a timeline and estimated completion date. I think that that's really important for us to see, because when I read through this entire thing, I'm extremely encouraged by the timeline and estimated completion dates that I see. And I don't want that information to get lost. I think it's important that we get a look at that, because that's the story of where we're going. And that's what's important. So if that could happen, I'd be very appreciative.
Madam Chair, Councillor Lindell, I'm happy to put that together for you. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Madam Chair, that's all I've got.
Great. Other questions from the committee? I just have one question for Director Oster, and Mr. Bowers, I forgot to thank you for being here tonight. Always helpful, and really appreciate you being here to present this. I know you're required to be here, but your presentation is always thorough and clear. So thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
Director
anytime.
Oster, I'm sorry.
I said absolutely anytime, not a problem.
Director Oster, can you comment a little bit on the city's financial health? I think we have seen some comments that, you know, because we've been late in our audits, because there's some internal issues, that somehow reflects on our financial well-being, stability, and our financial position is very strong, and there are a number of things that indicate that. And I wonder if you could maybe, in a nutshell, because we do have a couple other items tonight, give us maybe a walkthrough of some things that point to our financial health and our position as being strong.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Thank you for that question. Having audited financial statements that are available within, a reasonable time frame after the end of the fiscal year is very important for decision makers. There are also other metrics that we look at in assessing the financial health of the entity. One of those is the bond rating, and the city's bond ratings have been affirmed by two different rating agencies, Fitch and S&P, over the past year. We also had the largest ever gross receipts tax collection. This number is unaudited, but it was over $54.2 million of gross receipts tax that was collected in FY23. Again, that's the unaudited number based on what we received from the state. So that reflects very strong revenue growth coming out of the pandemic in our gross receipts tax, which is the primary revenue source for our general fund. Looking back at the financial statements on page 24, you'll see the statement of net position, and that shows the overall financial picture of the government. And that goes into page 25. And at the bottom of that statement, there's the net position section, and there's a section for unrestricted net position. So that's at the bottom of page 25 of the city's FY22 financial statements. So you'll see in the column that is called total on the right-hand side of the page that the city has an unrestricted positive net position of about $4.37 million. And I just wanted to compare that to some other entities. We discussed this in our audit committee, and I thought it was very interesting. One of our audit committee members compared Santa Fe's unrestricted net position to other cities. So I wanted to share that information with you. So by comparison, out of the, 7 cities that I pulled data on, Santa Fe is the only one with a positive unrestricted net position. Farmington for FY '22 had a negative 16.9 million unrestricted net position. Las Cruces, negative 97.7 million. Albuquerque, negative 625 million. Seattle, Washington, negative 220 million. San Francisco, California, negative 1.9 billion. And Chicago, Illinois was negative $36.55 billion deficit net position. So, of all of those cities, Santa Fe is the only one that has positive unrestricted net position. And, so I just wanted to put that in context. So as far as our overall financial health, I think getting back on track with our audits, getting timely with our audits is a very important step that we are taking. And there are also factors that make me feel very comfortable about where we're at financially as a city. And then in terms of the reserve balances, if you wanted to take a look at the fund balance for the general fund, let me get to that section of the report. So that is going to be on page 28 of the report in the general fund column. Scrolling is a little wonky here. Okay, so on page 28 of the FY '22 audit report, under unassigned fund balance, you'll see that the general fund as of 6/30 of 2022 had an unassigned fund balance of $62.8 million. Again, that's a positive number. That's a healthy number. And I feel very comfortable about our financial position.
And Director Oster, on that point, there is a certain amount of that reserve fund balance that is required by law. And I believe we are, in this year, we were over that required amount, meaning we have more in reserve than what state law requires. Am I correct in that?
Madam Chair, that is correct. The DFA, Department of Finance and Administration, requires that municipalities keep a reserve of 1/10 of their annual general fund budget. So this is significantly above that. This is more like 40% of our general fund budget.
Okay, thank you. And maybe just to put a finer point on it, why does state law require that local governments keep a reserve, and why maybe you can or you can't speak to why we have maintained a fairly high reserve balance? What's the thinking there?
Well, Madam Chair, as far as why the state requires municipalities to keep reserves, I think it's to ensure that there won't be interruptions to essential services if there are revenue downturns. So, we want to make sure that our police and fire and, essential services are continuing to operate even through unexpected revenue declines. In terms of why the city has a fund balance of $62.8 million in the general fund as of June 30th of 2022. In my opinion, that reflects the city's restraint, fiscal restraint in terms of the budgeting process, ensuring that while we were operating without audited financial statements, we were, being very prudent when it comes to our spending, because we were working with unaudited information. And, now that we're getting caught up, we're seeing that fund balance number grow, which is great. But we also, again, want to make sure that we have a cushion for emergencies that may come up.
Yeah, and I guess the other point I would make there is the volatility of our revenue sources. Maybe you could speak to that. And, we rely heavily, and perhaps you can give the public the percentage on GRT. And as people know, gross receipts taxes do swing. And we certainly saw that during the pandemic when our gross receipts taxes, what I would call, fell off a cliff. And we were in a period where we had no idea what the recovery would be or when, and having reserve balances in that kind of a crisis is an important thing, but maybe you can fill in what I've outlined there.
Certainly, Madam Chair. So gross receipts tax revenue is the majority of our revenue in the general fund. The percentage varies from year to year. I believe for the current fiscal year, it's around 74%. I can circle back on the exact percentage, but it's the primary revenue source for the general fund. And it is a volatile revenue source. As a location that's known for the arts and a beautiful climate, we are a tourist destination. And during things like COVID, which of course no one expected, a global pandemic to happen, tourism went away for a period of time. So having, healthy reserves to help us absorb those ups and downs and that volatility in our primary revenue source is extremely important. And it really helped the city weather the pandemic without having to make major austerity measures. Some folks might remember that, other municipalities around the country were facing some very difficult decisions during that time. Santa Fe was faced with difficult decisions as well, but had the city gone into it without reserve balances that were healthy, the decisions would have been much more difficult.
Thank you for that. And just one other thing, that's our reserve balances are also part of what helps give us the opportunity to have high bond ratings, correct?
Madam Chair, yes, that's an excellent point. And especially, as we've been unable to provide current audited financial statements, the bond rating agencies have looked at the fund balances and at the unaudited numbers, and they've, felt very comfortable with those numbers being large. So yes, absolutely. The money that is, unassigned in the fund balance could be used to pay our debt in the event that, other revenue sources were not available. And what the bond rating agencies are primarily looking at is credit risk. And, do we pay our bills? Are we able to service our debt? And are we a good investment for bondholders? And so, having a large balance of cash available really lowers the risk for our debt.
Yeah, and I think you make an excellent point that part of the reason there are bond ratings are for the investors who actually buy those bonds so that we have revenues to do the kinds of capital projects that we need to do. So they play a very important role, not just in they demonstrate our fiscal restraint and financial well-being, but that's important in terms of being able to actually sell those bonds.
Yes, Madam Chair, I agree. The bond rating agencies are looking at our financial statements and they're doing, their analysis of the city's financial position as part of their rating review process. But investors and purchasers of the bonds are also looking at the financial statements directly themselves and using them to make decisions, which is why the auditor's opinions are so important. Those unmodified opinions that AJ mentioned tell a potential investor that our financial statements can be relied on as part of their decision-making process. So that's, really one of the reasons why those unmodified opinions are the best and the gold standard.
Yeah, and I think we've come full circle now, which is where you started, which is that audited financial statements, very, very important. We're getting caught up. We have one more to go. You've done 2 in 6 months. We have one more scheduled to get us caught up in May of this year. And again, not minimizing the importance of getting these in and getting them in timely, but wanting to give a fuller picture of some of the factors that should give people confidence in how city government is being run and its financial health. And Councillor Cassett is dying to jump in here. So I can see your finger. So I will turn it over to Councillor Cassett.
Thank you. Yeah, I can't tell. I'm not used to this seat for some reason, I think yet. Maybe that's it. I'm not sure. I just wanted to follow up on a couple of those questions because this context is really important. You mentioned essential services. Now that has to do, correct me if I'm wrong, with the services that we are legally obligated to provide, correct? And that's essentially police, fire. What else?
Madam Chair, I don't know. I'm
Okay.
police and fire are, the examples
Okay.
of essential services.
Well, but then some of them would be, our utilities, but our utilities are not functioning on the same, that's an enterprise fund. And so that is a different, a different beast altogether. Because right now we were just talking about that general fund. And I think that's also really important that these reserves are for, those essentials that are covered by the general fund, but those other essentials, specifically water, solid waste, are all covered by those enterprise funds.
Madam Chair and Councillor Cassett, yes, I'm just getting to the page. So the enterprise fund financial statements start on page 38 of the audit report. And yes, that is correct. The $62 million number we've been talking about is specifically for the general fund. If you're interested in seeing the fund balances available in wastewater, water, and environmental services, that information is on page 39. I'm sorry, actually it's page 40, excuse me. And so for the wastewater fund, the unrestricted net position as of June 30th of 2022 is 29.66 million. The water fund is 52.87 million, and environmental services is 15.9 million.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. I do think that's really important to point out. Also, I mean, just a little credit to all of the things that the city is not legally required to do that we are funding. Our rec centers and our libraries and all of these incredible, our parks, these are really incredibly crucial, and also above and beyond what we are legally required to do as a city. And then the other point that Councilor Romero Worth had our fund balances and how we really relied on them during COVID. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but how much have we grown them since the end of, let's say FY20, when everything was, we had end of FY21, really rough year that year. Do you happen to know how quickly we've bounced back? What was our kind of our lowest point in those fund balances, or at least in the general fund?
Madam Chair and Councillor Cassett, we can put together a time series for you on the fund balance and the general fund. I don't have it in front of me right now, but we can put that together.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I think that also just takes a look at some of the fiscal responsibility in terms of having to build that back up, because we actually really did need to dip into that quite a bit during the height of the pandemic. So that was all. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick follow-up. Some of the questions that I had were answered during the dialogue that was just happened. But I think that it is important to remember that as we bring GRT, which is grocery receipts taxes, is basically our income source. And so having the response of us being frugal with our expenditures, obviously that shows fiscal strength. What my question is that do we, taking the period of COVID out of the mix there, when was the last time that we were in a negative net position, do you recall? And what was the driving factor in that reasoning? I know it predates you being here as the finance director, but if
Madam Chair and Councillor Garcia, we can do some research on that. I can tell you not during the time that I've been with the city, but we can certainly look back at some of the historical reports and see if there's been a time where the city had a deficit net position.
Yeah, I would appreciate that because I think it's important that we, when business is good, it's great to have that cash fund balance, but when it's not so good, as I think we learned during the COVID areas that, those reserves are definitely something that we need to rely on. And so, having a historical perspective on what could have caused us go into a net negative at some points in the past, would help us not doing so in the future.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Councillor Garcia. I will note that one of the main differences between particularly, the state of New Mexico and some of those other cities out of state that I mentioned that have the really large deficit net position is the funding of the pension plan. So we're actually fortunate here in New Mexico, the Public Employees Retirement Plan has a relatively high level of funding compared to peer organizations in other states like California and Chicago. So that liability for benefits that are due to be paid out to retirees in the future is reflected in the statement of net position. And, with para being relatively well-funded, our portion of that liability for the future is a smaller number than somewhere like Chicago, where the public pension plan is funded at a much lower level than what we have here in New Mexico. So we will look into it. There have been some changes made to para that have increased the level of funding. So off the top of my head, I would say that if there were something that were to drive the net position negative, it would probably be something like that. But I'll look into it and we'll see what we find out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Great. Thank you, Mr. Bowers, again for being here. We'll see you Wednesday night. This was just a dry run, and look forward to continuing the conversation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Okay, with that, I believe, Director Oster, you have an audit update for us on our last audit to be completed, FY23.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. We are in process, as Mr. Bowers mentioned. We are starting field work. The auditors are pulling samples, and we are in the process of completing the FY23 audit with that goal of submitting it to the state auditor's office in May. We are actively looking for opportunities to shave that timeline down, and having Matt Bonifer on our team is helping tremendously already. So I really appreciate Matt's presence. And so, yep, we're full steam ahead on FY23, working towards that May submission date and looking to do it faster if we can.
Great, thank you. Questions from the committee? Okay, we are on to our consent agenda. There are two items we're going to be looking at tonight. The first one is item C, which is a request for approval of amendment number 1 to item number 23-0493. This is an exclusive negotiating agreement with Midtown Santa Fe Productions, QOF, LLC, to extend the term through August 4th, 2024, with no corresponding change to other terms. And we have with us Karen Everson tonight, who is our director, new with the city, directing the Metropolitan Redevelopment Agency. And I believe, Councilor Lindell, you pulled this item, and welcome, Ms. Everson.
Thank you for being here tonight. Just a couple of really quick questions. You want to give us, first of all, just a very, very brief explanation of why we need this extension?
Yes, Chair Romero-Worth and Councilor Lindell. So the original reason why the ENA was drafted so tightly with such a tight timeline, this most recent one we executed had a year for negotiation with the Midtown Art and Design Alliance. The reason why it was executed with such a short time frame was because our development partner was going to use Opportunity Zone funds. And he repositioned his financial situation so he would not be using those funds. And this was something he reminded me of the last time he was here last week. And so when he made that change, it allowed the city to have more time to work out things that are very prudent for us to work out, such as the subdivision, utility layout, and other things that we need to have in order to move forward in good faith with the developer.
Thank you. As far as the contracts that we have currently on the studio, are those affected by this?
No, in fact, we are in a really good position and are working very hard to have a new film at the campus starting shortly.
Okay, I have no other questions. I'll move to approve.
Second,
A motion and a second. Other questions from the committee? Seeing none, can we get a roll call, Director Oster? And thank you, Director Everson, for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Counselor Cassett,
yes?
Counselor Lindell,
Yes,
Counselor Garcia,
Yes.
Counselor Faulkner,
Yes.
Chair Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. The other item pulled tonight is item H, request for approval of amendment number 1 to the Nichols Dam Outlet Works Rehabilitation Contract item number 23-0565 with CF Padilla LLC to increase the compensation by $591,789.32, including NMGRT, for a new total contract amount of looks like $17,559,295.54, including NMGRT, and to increase the term for substantial completion by 15 calendar days for a new total of 602 calendar days. And we have Taylor, and Taylor, how do I pronounce your last name? Jurgens? Jurgens, we pronounce the J. Jurgens, engineer, and Counselor Lindell, I think you pulled this item.
I did. Thank you. My radar is up on this project because we've never worked with this contractor before. So I go through this very, very carefully because we don't have any history with this contractor, and it's $16 million. And we just approved that contract recently. Why was this not included in the original contract?
Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, this was originally planned to be part of the original contract that was bid out, that CF Padilla ultimately was awarded. We ran into some procurement issues that initially UConn is sort of our on-call SCADA contractor who handles a lot of our controls and our integration and things like that for our Canyon Road treatment plant. And so we were originally going to have this SCADA scope of work in the original contract documents, part of the whole package. But procurement did not approve that. They didn't like the fact that we were naming UConn as the listed contractor to do this portion of the work. So ultimately, we had to remove that from the original contract. And now it's still necessary work that needs to be done as part of the project. But we had to go through this change order route in order to get that SCADA work into the contract.
Well, forgive me, but this didn't go out to bid, did it? This was, I mean, we just called out UConn.
The change order? We requested a proposal from Padilla, and we have a defined scope of work of what needs to be done. And requested the proposal from Padilla, form that work, and left it unnamed in terms of who the contractor was. We have the ability to approve who that subcontractor was because it's pretty critical services and infrastructure that they're working on, but we left it open to a city-approved contractor to complete the work, and UConn is who they reached out to.
Whom we originally called out in the first place.
That's who we were originally going to call out before it was pulled from the contract.
Well, it sounds like we went through a lot of extra work to get to where we were originally, and that's a process problem. And it's frustrating. On contracts, I've been on this committee for a while, and when we start getting into numerous change orders, I don't like that. And so we've got one almost immediately. I'm also unclear. Padilla says, so we called them out originally, but then that was a problem with procurement. So then we went out and did this change order, which then we did through Padilla. And I see on their page 7 of 84, they say that the price was minimally marked up for corporate overhead and increased bonding costs. This isn't really a question. I'm just trying to point these things out. So then when we go to the actual, Padilla goes to McDade Woodcock for a quote, and that comes in at $494. And then Padilla marks it up to $553, which they may find to be minimally, but I still find it to be $60,000, which seems totally unnecessary to me if we perhaps had not gone or had to go through this process. I'm not clear. But the other thing that bothers me with this is on page 11 of the breakdown of all of this. I mean, the costs on so much of this are pretty minimal in the big scheme of things. We're talking $4,000 labor cost, $5,000 material takeoff. I mean, we've got $659 for the use of a pickup truck. And then you go down a little further and you get to line 18, which is $476,000 for subcontractors that I have no idea what that means. And there's no explanation to it. I don't find that acceptable. I'm not going to be able to support this until I have more detail on it, because I have no idea what that means. And that's the big number in this. The rest of it, I can figure that out. You know, direct job expenses, although I do like the way it's $1,495.29. I don't know what the 29 cents is for, but I'm bothered by this. And it's not very complete and it's not very clear, and that's not on you. So that's all I've got, Chair.
Thank you, Counselor. Did you all have any context you want to give us, or just take the comments as they are? And if you wouldn't mind, just tell us your name
Sure,
and
yeah.
title so that the public knows.
Sure, yeah, I'm John Delmar. I'm the engineer supervisor in the water division. I work with Taylor and we sort of share project management of this project. I just wanted to point out that McDade Woodcock was the electrical subcontractor that Cia Padilla originally selected for the project. And actually, after they put their original bid, that McDade Woodcock actually bought Yukon. So Yukon is now basically a subsidiary of their electrical contractor. So that may explain a little bit why it lacks some detail, because it's now McDade Woodcock who's actually doing the work that previously would have been called Yukon. And Yukon happens to be the subcontractor that we have used historically for all of our Upper Canyon Road work. And we wanted to specify them directly because of the consistency you need in your SCADA systems. SCADA being supervisory control and data acquisition, basically all the operation, computing and operation of the system. But we were willing to let Cia Padilla go and find equivalent subcontractors if they could, that could do the work. That's basically the deal we made with procurement, is we need to be willing not to sole source these and look at other options. But it happens that their subcontractor purchased Yukon. So I don't know if that helps at all, but I wanted to add that.
Counselor?
It doesn't really. I mean, I appreciate you saying that, but it still seems to me clearly that it's a sole source contract in reality. And additionally, you know, they spell things out to the penny of how much it's going to cost to use their truck. And then tell me that, well, subcontractors, $476,000. I don't know what those subcontractors are doing. They need to give us some specificity as to what that is. I mean, that's a ridiculously large amount of money compared to what all these other line items are. And they're so specific about everything else that I need to know what that is. So maybe this gets passed, maybe it gets postponed. But I don't know what I'm agreeing to in all reality. So that's all I have, Chair.
So is Yukon the subcontractor?
The subcontractor to Cia Padilla is McDade Woodcock, and they've purchased Yukon. So I think it's right to say that McDade Woodcock has this subsidiary basically that does SCADA work. But because it's owned by their subcontractor, I think we would call McDade the subcontractor.
But they're not a bunch of subcontractors. There's just one.
That's correct.
And you see that on page 814, I believe, of our packet, where it lists the subcontractor as Yukon and Associates for $476,200.
Yeah, and
So it's not a bunch of subcontractors doing different things. It's this one.
correct. And I guess I would also point out that the project has, 1,500 pages of specs, and the specifications for this work are called out in significant detail in those specs. And that's what they were bidding to, is building these cabinets that are described well in the drawings and the specs. But I don't think they did a really good job of defining that when they put together that proposal. So,
Councilor Lindell.
I'll make this my last comment. I'm sorry.
And I'll stop butting in.
Nonetheless, Padilla added $60,000 onto this bid. And I'm not sure if that would have been the case if we'd have gone with the original process that you proposed. But they may call that a minimal add-on, but I don't. So that's all I have, Chair.
Councilor Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Thank you for raising those questions, Counselor Lindell. I think that it would be very prudent for us to be at least able to know exactly what it is that we are paying for in this extra addition to the contract. My question would be, is that can this contractor, can we proceed with the work on Nichols without approving this additional contract, or is this a deal breaker for what, for the work that needs to be done?
Madam Chair, Councilor Garcia, this is what we consider very near a critical path work. The lead time on the cabinets that are being built is on the order of 6 to 9 months. So it is a fairly critical item. It's also a project that has seasonal schedule constraints where we have to be digging into our dam this fall and winter after the runoff period, but before the next year's runoff period. So if this were to be delayed, it would create some challenges, but I won't say they're insurmountable, but it is difficult. We would want to be in the next committee meeting with, I guess if we had to bring it to this committee again, we'd want to get it out on the next agenda. I feel like 2 weeks is probably about all we'd want to give up.
Thank you. I appreciate the questions that were raised because I feel that it is already a substantial contract. And, you know, when companies come to us with this agreement, to come to ask for more and utilizing the notion that it'll delay the project or it's not get done or we'll just pull out. I mean, I think, again, a contract is a contract, and I would hate to see this work be delayed. But I also feel that coming to the table to ask for more and more time, I think in the future is going to be pretty hard for me to support. Thank you for bringing this, and thank you for pulling it, Councilor Linda.
Counselor Cassett?
I'm just curious about the additional information and how long it would take. The next stop is governing body. Nothing that stops us from potentially getting more information at governing body and pulling it then, which would, you know, reduce the delay, but that's 48 hours for y'all. How does that time frame look for you?
Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, I believe we could bring the additional information, at least from the, our existing specifications, which is the basis of that bid to governing body. If that would be, it means getting it added probably to that agenda. And if I may, I did want to just point out a couple of things. One, that this change order was really by design from the city. I wouldn't put any blame on the contractor trying to raise this. It's a somewhat dysfunctional way we've had to do this. And the options we had when we had to pull it from our original bid was either to contract directly as the city with these SCADA contractors and then coordinate the work, which basically takes the risk off of our contractor, and they can then raise their hands and say, this is not ours. And this is our preferred method where they take on greater risk and they now own the functionality and full scope of this, which I think is part of when they do a markup, they are taking on additional responsibility and risk for the project that wasn't there in their original bid. So I just wanted to point that out, that CF Padilla also came in about $2 million below our engineer's estimate in their original bid. So even without this scope, they came in with a very competitive bid. They were the only bidder, but we've been very happy with them up to this point. They've been very responsive. So I don't want to
Yeah.
make it sound like they're, and I should point out one more thing. We have two more items of scope that we're going to have to change order into this project for the same reason. It's a procurement challenge we've faced going into this. So you're going to see another one probably in a 4 to 6 weeks.
So with that in mind, I mean, I think that shifting of risk is very important away from the city. This, I would just caution the committee, this is a very, very important project. And it is, I think, you know, all the dominoes need to fall at the proper moments because of all the factors, because of weather and seasonal ability to do this work, which is very important for our water infrastructure. I do think that Councillor Lindell has flagged, you know, some things that as you bring these other things forward, you know, I think it's going to be important that you provide more context because this scrutiny is not going to go away. And maybe there's a way that you could provide some of this information, you know, by email or something to help answer some of the concerns without us having to hold it up. So that's another route. What's the pleasure of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second?
I have an emotion and a second to approve this item. Can we get a roll call, Director Oster?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett,
Yes.
Councillor Lindell, Councillor Garcia,
Yes.
Councillor Faulkner,
Yes.
Councillor Romero Worth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I just, again, probably better give us some more context. Thank you. Okay, we are now moving to, we have no executive session, but we do have introduction of legislation. So tonight I will be introducing for the mayor consideration of a resolution number 2024, acknowledging the city's fiscal year 2022 audit report and findings and accepting management's responses for correcting the findings. Director Oster is the staff person on this. This is on a pretty quick timeline. It's being introduced tonight for consideration at the governing body meeting on Wednesday. And this is to comply with both a deadline that the Department of Finance and Administration has set for receiving this resolution. And this is a new requirement that started with FY22 audits. We didn't do this with the FY21 audit, but we do have to do it with this one. So now that the audit has been presented both to the audit committee, to the finance committee, and to the governing body on Wednesday night, we then need to have a corresponding resolution that is then sent to DFA to kind of close this matter. So that's being introduced tonight. It will be under consideration and at the governing body meeting on Wednesday night. So that's introduced. And then let's see. From there, we go to matters from staff. Director Oster.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have one matter for you tonight. We received authorization from the Department of Finance and Administration to add the FY22 and FY23 legislative capital appropriations to our fiscal agent agreement with North Central New Mexico Economic Development District. And so I will be working with the city attorney's office to prepare an amendment to add those additional projects, which is really good news. We were excited to get the green light to send that through. So that'll help us get that capital outlay money deployed quickly.
Great, thank you. That is good news. Matters from the committee. Counselor Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a response or a request from the Finance Department in regards to letting us know what using the fiscal agent is going to cost us, and just give us a breakdown of what that is. Thank you much.
Certainly, Madam Chair and Councillor Lee Garcia, the way that the amendment is currently written, the fiscal agent fee is 3% of amounts expended during the time that the fiscal agent is providing their service. So I could provide you with the maximum amount, but it will be limited to just expenditures that are processed during the time that they're serving as the fiscal agent.
Yeah, and I would just add, to be clear, that we will only be using them while our audits are still being prepared, correct? Or, well, yeah.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, we're hopeful that DFA will lift the fiscal agent requirement once we're caught up with our audits. It will be, up to them, but we're optimistic that once we've completed the FY23 audit and we're no longer behind on our audits, that there might be, a change in the need to utilize a fiscal agent.
Right, and with that said, I do think, I did hear a rumor that the junior money, the quote unquote junior money, which is now called GROW at the legislature for this fiscal year, I think they're going to be requiring fiscal agents for everybody on that money, but I don't know. Stay tuned. Maybe I think that's right, but don't quote me. Okay. Matters from the committee, other matters, we're good. Matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Monday, February 12th. Thank you all for being here and for the conversation. Really appreciate it.